Thank you. The chair would now recognize Mr. Suozzi from New York for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me start by stating the obvious, which is this is incredibly complicated. And I want to thank all of you for sharing your knowledge with us today. I'm going to echo what all my colleagues have said, is that we really need to hear from the administration as to what their plan is to address this very complicated part of the world. There's an epic struggle going on in the world, and unlike the Cold War, where it was clear that it was the Soviets versus the Americans, this is much more complicated. It's stability versus instability. It's control versus chaos, as Tom Friedman said in his book. And we've gone from 35 million refugees in the world 10 years ago to 65 million refugees today, and many of them are from Syria. And as the doctor pointed out in her testimony a few minutes ago, this is destabilizing other countries as they try and deal with all these refugees in Jordan and Lebanon and in other countries, in Turkey. And this region is so complicated by the fact there are so many parties involved with Assad and Iran and Russia, and then the rebel forces, America, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, the Turks, don't like the Kurds. I mean, it's so many moving pieces here, and it's so complicated. But we have to choose in this world that is facing this struggle of stability versus instability where we're going to focus our resources and where we have to make choices as to where we're going to pay attention and what we're going to do. And we've heard from, I think it was Brad Sherman before and Congressman Kinzinger about some of these choices we have to make. And for me, let's put chemical weapons aside, which I think there's bipartisan international agreement that we have to, combat the best way that we can. But if the choice is between, for right now, what's right in front of us, and you have to choose between fighting Al-Qaeda and ISIS in Syria or trying to protect the Syrian people and undoing Assad and forcing him to the negotiating table. You have to choose between those two. What's the most important thing in front of the United States right now in our national interest? Is it to combat Al-Qaeda and ISIS, or is it to stop Assad and force him to the negotiating table? Which is the most important thing before us right now? And you have to choose, each one of you. Mr. Singh, you go first.
I'm going to disappoint you because I think it's a false choice, frankly. I think that if you sort of go back to my initial statement, I think, in fact, we have now sort of several discrete conflicts which are going on within Syria that implicate our interests in the region and implicate the security of our allies. And we can't neglect one for the sake of the other. We have to address all of them. But it's a mistake to think, as Mr. Lister has said, that we can address all of them together in one neat package or look at them as one problem to be solved. We have to address them sort of in a distinct way. So in eastern Syria, there's no doubt that our priority has to be defeating ISIS, and then not just defeating ISIS, but thinking about what comes next, because we don't want ISIS to return. But
that's the focus now is on Raqqa.
On Raqqa, right? In western Syria, though, absolutely, the continued sort of brutality of the Assad regime, the expansion of Iranian power, the expansion of Hezbollah's power is a tremendous concern, not just for us, but for Israel, for Turkey, for our allies.
Now, I've learned somewhere that 85% of the population of Syria is in western Syria. Is that correct? Okay.
That's correct.
I may briefly. I mentioned in an earlier answer that we have found ourselves capable for about 2 years to combat ISIS primarily in isolation from the rest of the conflict. But we're now discovering that when we reach Raqqa, which is an Arab town, there are big knock-on effects of doing that with certain actors, and we're finding suddenly the proliferation of knock-on effects along the northern Syrian border. And it's for that reason that I would agree with my colleague, Mr. Singh, that combating terrorism in Syria and protecting civilians are inextricably linked. Terrorist narratives, no matter what kind of terrorist you are, is linked to the fact that there is suffering, chaos, instability, and brutality in their world.
So that's empowering them.
And it's empowering them like nothing else that would be possible. And so I would suggest it is impossible for us to win against terrorism, whatever that might mean, without encompassing that strategy, protection of civilians, a de-intensification of the conflict, and challenging the Assad regime's freedom to use any means at his disposal to continue to kill people en masse.
Doctor?
Thank you. I would agree completely about the inextricability between these two options. And I would give as an example something we've talked about extensively today that I think exemplifies this, right? After Raqqa is liberated, there will be a number of political, governance, and humanitarian questions before us, essentially, as those who have trained the militias that oust the ISIS terrorists. And those include who will govern, whether they're Kurdish and Arab, and how much leverage we can push on them to not hand over territory to the regime. Those questions will affect how much we can protect the civilians in that liberated area of Syria. And those are things within our purview, within our power, within our leverage, through our training and assisting of the partners that will do the liberation. So
I know my time has expired. I just want to make this one last point. By us going after ISIS and al-Qaeda, which is in our own self-interest, obviously, in our national security interest, we must do it, we're aiding Assad and Russia and Iran in the process. Because they have the same enemy.